From the dusty pages of ancient scripture to the whispered legends carried by countless cultures, one question has haunted humanity. Did giants really walk the earth? The Bible itself gives us a startling hint in Genesis 6, when it speaks of the mysterious Nephilim, beings born of the union between the sons of God and the daughters of men. For thousands of years, scholars, theologians, and seekers of truth have debated the meaning of this passage. Were these giants flesh and blood creatures towering over ordinary humans? Or were they symbols of something deeper, something that speaks to humanity's ongoing struggle with corruption, rebellion, and divine judgment? When we turn to the book of Numbers, we find the Israelite spies trembling at the sight of the Anakim, describing themselves as mere grasshoppers in comparison. Later, in the story of David and Goliath, the biblical text presents not just a battle between two men, but a confrontation between the fragile faith of humanity and the towering forces that seem unconquerable. Yet these are not isolated accounts. Across the world, from the Greek tales of the Titans to the Norse myths of the Jotun, from Ireland's Fomorians to the Native American legends of mound-building giants, echoes of this mystery continue to resound. Could all these stories, scattered across continents and centuries, be fragments of one deeper truth? The story of the Nephilim is not just about ancient giants. It is about a world before the flood, a time when corruption had spread so far that God chose to cleanse the earth. It forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. Were these beings real creatures that left traces in archaeology and myth? Or are they representations of the dangers of humanity mixing heaven's gift with earthly rebellion? Even more, why does Jesus himself warn that the days before his return will be as in the days of Noah? Could this be a hidden clue that the Nephilim mystery is not locked away in the past, but remains relevant to the spiritual battles of today? In this video, we are going to peel back the layers of myth, scripture, and symbolism. We will explore the biblical accounts of the Nephilim, the apocryphal stories that expand upon them, the global myths that mirror their presence, and the modern theories that keep their memory alive. But most importantly, we will ask what the mystery of giants truly reveals about the human condition, the spiritual war between light and darkness, and the hope that Scripture offers us as we face the giants in our own lives. Stay with me, because this journey is going to challenge what you thought you knew about the Bible, history, and the unseen world that shapes our reality. When we open the Bible to Genesis 6:1-4, we encounter one of the most enigmatic and controversial passages in all of Scripture. It tells us, when human beings began to increase in number on the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Then the Lord said, "My spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal. Their days will be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown." These few verses have sparked endless debate. Who exactly were the sons of God? Who were the Nephilim? And why did their presence lead directly into the narrative of God's judgment through the flood? The first interpretation favored by many ancient Jewish traditions, sees the sons of God as heavenly beings, fallen angels who descended to earth, took human wives, and produced offspring that were neither fully divine nor fully human. This interpretation paints the Nephilim as monstrous hybrids, corrupted beings whose existence defiled creation and contributed to the violence and wickedness that spread across the earth. Their presence symbolized a rebellion that blurred the boundaries God Himself had set between heaven and earth, spirit and flesh, the holy and the profane. In this reading, the flood was not just God's judgment on sinful humanity, but a cosmic reset meant to cleanse the world of this unnatural corruption. The second interpretation, more common among later Christian theologians, sees the sons of God not as angels, but as the righteous lineage of Seth, intermarrying with the unrighteous descendants of Cain. In this view, the Nephilim were not supernatural giants, but powerful rulers, tyrants who dominated humanity with violence and oppression. Their renown was not based on divine greatness, but on worldly power, bloodshed, and pride. This interpretation shifts the story away from supernatural hybrids toward the dangers of moral compromise. When the people of God mix with the corruption of the world, the result is destruction on a massive scale. The Bible doesn't stop at Genesis. In Numbers 13, when the Israelite spies returned from scouting the land of Canaan, they report that they saw giants there, descendants of Anak. Their description is chilling. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. This suggests that the memory, or perhaps even the reality, of giant-like beings survived the flood narrative, haunting Israel's story as they sought to enter the Promised Land. Were these literal descendants of the Nephilim, or was this the language of fear, exaggerating the strength of Israel's enemies? Either way, the psychological weight of giants loomed large over the nation's destiny. And then, of course, there is the story of David and Goliath. Though Goliath is not explicitly called a Nephilim, he is described as a descendant of the Rephaim, another group of giants mentioned in the Old Testament. His massive stature, his heavy armor, and his terrifying presence make him the embodiment of the giant archetype, a seemingly unstoppable enemy standing in defiance of God's people. Yet it is not size, strength, or worldly power that wins the day. It is faith. David's victory over Goliath becomes the pattern for how God's people are called to confront the giants in their own lives, not through human might, but through trust in the Lord. Taken together, these biblical accounts paint a complex picture. The Nephilim stand at the crossroads of history, myth, and theology. Whether viewed as fallen angel hybrids, oppressive rulers, or archetypal enemies, they represent forces that seek to corrupt, dominate, and intimidate humanity. Their presence in the Bible is not just about the past. It sets the stage for how we understand spiritual battles in the present. The giants of Genesis, Numbers, and Samuel remind us that evil can appear overwhelming, larger than life, but it can be defeated when we anchor ourselves in God's truth and courage. If the biblical account leaves us with more questions than answers, it is the apocryphal and extra-biblical writings that attempt to fill in the gaps. Among these, the Book of Enoch stands out as the most detailed and influential. Written centuries before the time of Christ and cherished in early Jewish and Christian circles, Enoch expands the cryptic Genesis account into a sweeping narrative of rebellion, judgment, and cosmic corruption. According to this text, 200 angels, known as the Watchers, descended to earth on Mount Hermon. They lusted after human women, entered into forbidden unions with them, and produced monstrous offspring, the giants. These giants, the Nephilim, are portrayed not as mere tall men, but as beings of immense size and destructive power, devouring everything in sight and turning on humanity with violence and oppression. Their very existence is depicted as a crime against creation, a desecration of the boundaries God had established. The Book of Enoch goes further, claiming that these fallen angels also taught humanity forbidden knowledge, arts of war, sorcery, astrology, and seduction. This detail reframes the Nephilim not only as physical giants, but as symbols of corrupted wisdom, knowledge twisted from divine purpose into tools of domination. It is here that we find a bridge between biblical theology and broader mythologies. The image of semi-divine beings bestowing gifts of knowledge, which often come with catastrophic consequences. The flood in Enoch's account becomes God's judgment not only on human wickedness, but on the contamination of the entire created order by these beings and their fathers, the Watchers. The Book of Jubilees, another ancient Jewish work, echoes these themes. It presents the Nephilim as central to the spread of sin and violence before the flood. Unlike Genesis, which remains terse and mysterious, these apocryphal writings are explicit. The world was overrun by hybrid beings, and the destruction of the flood was necessary to restore balance. Though not part of the biblical canon for most traditions, these texts shaped the imagination of early Christians and Jews, influencing how they understood the dangers of rebellion against God's order. We can also see clear parallels in Mesopotamian mythology. The Apkallu, semi-divine sages in Sumerian and Babylonian tradition, were said to descend from the gods and impart forbidden knowledge to humanity. Gilgamesh, the hero of the Epic of Gilgamesh, is described as 2/3 divine and 1/3 human, a giant figure whose exploits echo those of the Nephilim. These stories are not identical to the Hebrew accounts, but their similarities suggest a cultural memory shared across the ancient Near East, that something extraordinary, even unnatural, once occurred between the realms of the divine and the human. Yet not all interpreters agreed. By the time of the early church, a competing interpretation arose, the so-called Sons of Seth theory. This view, popularized by Augustine and carried into later theology, argued that the sons of God were simply the righteous descendants of Seth, who intermarried with the ungodly line of Cain. In this reading, the Nephilim were not hybrid giants, but powerful human rulers, whose pride and tyranny made them legendary. This interpretation sought to steer the story away from angelic rebellion and toward a moral lesson. When the godly compromise with the ungodly, corruption spreads like wildfire. The clash between these interpretations reveals the tension at the heart of the Nephilim story. Were they truly supernatural hybrids, the result of cosmic rebellion? Or were they exaggerated descriptions of corrupt rulers and dynasties? The apocryphal writings leaned toward the former, offering vivid details that captivated imaginations for centuries. Whether or not one accepts these accounts as literal, they testify to an ancient conviction that humanity once faced forces larger, darker, and more corrupt than anything we encounter in the ordinary course of life. What is certain is that the Nephilim, as portrayed in these extra-biblical sources, became a symbol of the breakdown of divine order, a symbol that continued to echo across cultures and faith traditions. These stories invite us to consider not only what may have happened in the past, but also how rebellion, corruption, and the misuse of knowledge continue to threaten humanity in every age. As soon as we move beyond the biblical and apocryphal texts, we step into the world of archaeology, folklore, and legend, a world filled with tantalizing clues, bold claims, and no small amount of controversy. Around the globe, stories of giants resurface again and again, as if etched into the memory of humanity itself. Yet the evidence for their physical existence has always been a matter of debate, with each claim raising more questions than it answers. One of the most sensational topics tied to the Nephilim mystery is the claim of giant skeletons unearthed in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Newspaper reports from America frequently spoke of enormous human remains being found in burial mounds, some allegedly measuring 8, 10, or even 12 feet tall. These stories fueled the imagination of the public and seemed to confirm the legends of Native American tribes who spoke of ancient giants that once roamed the land. Yet as archaeology became more professionalized, many of these discoveries were dismissed as hoaxes, misidentified animal bones, or exaggerations meant to sell newspapers. The Smithsonian Institution, in particular, has often been accused of covering up evidence of giants, an accusation that continues to feed modern conspiracy theories. Whether the Smithsonian actively suppressed such finds or simply debunked fraudulent claims is still a subject of heated debate. But the controversy itself highlights how deeply the idea of giants continues to grip the human imagination. Even if physical remains are disputed, megalithic structures around the world pose another mystery. From the towering stones of Stonehenge to the massive blocks at Baalbek in Lebanon, from the pyramids of Egypt to the colossal statues of Easter Island, humanity has left behind monuments that seem to defy the abilities of ancient societies. Could these be remnants of a lost age of giants, beings with the size and strength to move stones that weigh hundreds of tons? Mainstream archaeology insists that human ingenuity, combined with large workforces, can explain these feats. But to those who believe in the reality of giants, such structures stand as mute testimony to their existence, a legacy of a race that once walked the earth. Beyond archaeology, the legends themselves are strikingly consistent. The Greeks told of the Titans, enormous beings who ruled before the Olympian gods. The Norse sagas spoke of the Jotun, frost and fire giants who battled against the gods in cosmic struggles. Celtic myth preserved tales of the Fomorians, monstrous beings who opposed the Tuatha De Danann, the shining race of Ireland. In Mesoamerica, the Aztecs spoke of the Quinametzin, a race of giants who lived in an earlier age and were destroyed by the gods. Even among the indigenous tribes of North America, from the Paiute to the Choctaw, legends describe wars fought against red-haired giants who once dominated the land. It is difficult to dismiss the global scope of these stories, especially when they echo so closely the biblical theme. A race of beings larger, stronger, and more terrifying than ordinary men, who ultimately fell into ruin. Skeptics argue that myths of giants are symbolic, serving as cultural metaphors for the forces of chaos, nature, or oppressive rulers. A giant could represent the overwhelming power of enemies, or the hubris of humanity before divine judgment. This symbolic reading cannot be ignored, but it does not fully explain why so many disparate cultures across continents independently arrived at nearly identical motifs. Could it be that these legends are fragments of a shared human memory, dim echoes of a reality long forgotten, but too impactful to vanish completely? Interestingly, some researchers have tied the giant legends to humanity's own evolutionary history. Fossil evidence shows that other species of hominids, such as Gigantopithecus in Asia, stood much taller than modern humans. Though not directly linked to the Nephilim, the existence of such creatures suggests that the human imagination did not invent giants out of thin air. Instead, early encounters with massive primates, combined with oral tradition and myth, could have fueled stories that later blended with theological narratives. Ultimately, archaeology and legend leave us at a crossroads. On one hand, there is no undisputed physical evidence of giant humans. On the other, there is an overwhelming flood of myths, stories, and monumental architecture that refuses to be ignored. Whether these giants were literal beings, distorted memories of ancient encounters, or archetypal symbols embedded in the human psyche, their shadow looms large across human history. And perhaps that is the point. Giants are meant to loom, to stand taller than life, to confront us with mysteries too big to dismiss. The Nephilim mystery, when viewed through the lens of archaeology and legend, becomes less about proving or disproving giants, and more about recognizing how deeply embedded they are in humanity's understanding of itself. They challenge us to ask whether myths are merely fiction, or whether they are coded memories of an ancient reality we are still struggling to comprehend. When we step back from the literal debates about whether giants physically walked the earth, we begin to uncover another layer of the Nephilim mystery, one that is deeply symbolic and profoundly spiritual. The biblical writers did not merely record stories for their historical curiosity. They preserved narratives that carried meaning, warning, and insight for every generation. Giants, in this sense, are more than flesh and blood beings. They represent the forces that overwhelm humanity, the corruptions that tower above us, and the obstacles that only faith can conquer. Take, for instance, the spies in Numbers 13, who described themselves as grasshoppers before the Anakim. Even if we set aside the possibility of literal giants, the story reveals the way fear distorts perception. The land was good. God's promises were sure. Yet the people's terror made their enemies appear insurmountable. The giants became less about physical stature and more about the psychological and spiritual intimidation that paralyzes the human heart. In this sense, giants symbolize the exaggerated power we give to our fears when we forget to trust in God. David and Goliath offers perhaps the clearest example of this symbolic dimension. Goliath's size and armor are described in painstaking detail, creating the image of an unbeatable enemy. Yet the narrative pivots not on David's physical skill, but on his unshakable confidence in the Lord. The giant falls not because of superior weapons, but because of superior faith. The story echoes through history as a reminder that the greatest battles are not fought with swords or spears, but with courage rooted in trust. The giant, therefore, is an archetype of the seemingly invincible forces: addiction, injustice, fear, pride, that can only be defeated by the power of God working through the weak. The Nephilim themselves, described as heroes of old, men of renown, carry another symbolic weight. Their renown was not born of righteousness, but of corruption. They were legends, but legends of violence and rebellion. They stand as reminders that fame and power, when divorced from God's will, become monstrous. In this way, the Nephilim story becomes a warning. When humanity seeks to cross boundaries not meant to be crossed, when divine gifts are twisted into tools of arrogance, the result is destruction. Giants symbolize the consequences of human rebellion, amplified to cosmic proportions. The Church Fathers and early theologians often read these stories through this symbolic lens. Origen, Augustine, and others saw in the giants metaphors for the swelling of human pride, the elevation of the flesh over the spirit. For them, the flood that followed was not only an act of historical judgment, but an allegory of how unchecked corruption sweeps away all that is good. In their writings, giants became less about bones and stature and more about sin, grown to unnatural proportions. This spiritual symbolism remains powerful today. We may not encounter Nephilim walking our streets, but we face giants every day. Systems of oppression, personal sins, doubts, and fears that seem larger than life. The Nephilim mystery challenges us to ask, what giants are we bowing to in our own lives? What spiritual battles feel impossible to win? And how might God be calling us, like David, to face them with faith rather than fear? Seen this way, the Nephilim are not distant relics of an ancient world, but mirrors held up to our own struggles. They remind us that evil often appears intimidating, overwhelming, even unbeatable. But the message of Scripture is clear. Giants fall, corruption crumbles, and even the most terrifying forces can be overcome when God fights on our side. In the modern world, the Nephilim mystery has not faded into obscurity. On the contrary, it has taken on new life, woven into theories, conspiracies, and alternative histories that attempt to explain both ancient mysteries and current events. Some of these interpretations are rooted in genuine theological curiosity, while others drift into speculation and sensationalism. Yet together, they reveal how deeply humanity still longs to uncover the truth about the giants said to have once walked the earth. One of the most persistent modern claims is that evidence of giants has been deliberately suppressed. Stories abound of giant skeletons discovered in the 1800s and early 1900s, often published in newspapers of the time. According to many researchers, the Smithsonian Institution and other academic authorities systematically confiscated or destroyed these remains, fearing that proof of giants would overturn accepted theories of human history and evolution. While mainstream science insists there is no credible evidence of such cover-ups, the very accusation reflects a widespread belief that official institutions cannot be trusted to reveal the whole truth. For many, the Nephilim mystery has become a symbol of hidden knowledge, something powerful that they don't want us to know. Others take the Nephilim narrative and blend it with modern theories of extraterrestrials. Ancient astronaut theorists argue that the sons of God in Genesis 6 were not angels, but beings from another world who interbred with humanity. In this reading, the Nephilim were not only giants, but alien-human hybrids, and their advanced knowledge may explain the construction of megalithic sites and the sudden rise of ancient civilizations. While traditional biblical interpretation strongly resists this theory, its popularity underscores how flexible the Nephilim story has become in the modern imagination. It is a canvas onto which people project their deepest questions about origins, identity, and the unknown. Still others see the Nephilim as proof of a lost civilization, perhaps Atlantis, or another advanced culture that perished in a cataclysm. According to this perspective, giants were survivors, or rulers of that forgotten age, and their memory lives on in myths and ruins scattered across the globe. Here, the Nephilim serve as a bridge between biblical history and the endless human fascination with hidden pasts and forbidden archaeology. But perhaps the most important question is not whether these modern theories are factually accurate, but why they resonate so powerfully. The enduring fascination with giants reveals a longing to believe that the world is more mysterious, more layered than what we are told. The Nephilim mystery taps into the universal sense that history has secrets yet to be uncovered, and that humanity itself may not fully understand its own story. For Christians, however, there is both a danger and an opportunity here. The danger is that fascination with conspiracies can distract from the central message of Scripture, leading believers into endless speculation rather than faith. Yet the opportunity lies in using this fascination as a bridge. When people ask about giants, forbidden history, or hidden knowledge, it opens the door to discuss what the Bible actually says and what its warnings and promises mean for us today. In the end, the modern interpretations of the Nephilim may be wildly diverse, ranging from alien theories to suppressed archaeology, but they all testify to the same truth. This ancient mystery still speaks. It still raises questions about humanity's place in creation, the boundary between the natural and the supernatural, and the ongoing battle between truth and deception. Whether one sees the Nephilim as literal giants, lost civilizations, or symbols of rebellion, the fascination itself reveals that the giant question is far from dead. If the Nephilim were only a matter of ancient history or myth, they might be fascinating, but ultimately irrelevant. Yet the Bible suggests otherwise. Jesus himself, in Matthew chapter 24:37, warns that, as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. This cryptic statement ties the end times directly to the conditions of the pre-flood world, a world that, according to Genesis, was marked by violence, corruption, and the presence of the Nephilim. The prophetic question then arises: is there a connection between the giants of old and the struggles we face in the last days. Some interpreters would see this connection in literal terms. They argue that the same forces that produced the Nephilim before the flood, fallen angels, hybrid corruption, or forbidden knowledge, may attempt to return at the end of the age. In this view, modern advances in genetics, transhumanism, and artificial intelligence could be the technological echo of what the Watchers once did by blending heaven and earth. Just as humanity crossed boundaries in ancient times, so today we are tempted to rewrite creation in our own image, creating a new kind of giant that threatens to distort God's order. The Nephilim thus become not just a story of the past, but a warning of what may yet come. Others read Jesus' words symbolically, but the meaning is no less urgent. The days of Noah were marked by spiritual compromise, unchecked violence, and a culture that ignored God until it was too late. In this reading, the Nephilim represent the towering systems of sin and corruption that dominate societies, growing so large that they seem unshakable. These giants may not be 10-foot warriors, but global structures of greed, oppression, deception, and idolatry that tower over humanity, daring us to resist them. Just as Israel trembled before the Anakim, so modern believers often feel overwhelmed by forces too vast to overcome. Yet the biblical message is clear. The giants fall when God intervenes. The book of Revelation also resonates with this theme. While it does not explicitly mention Nephilim, its imagery of beasts, hybrids, and monstrous powers suggests a world once again overtaken by forces that blur the line between human and inhuman, natural and supernatural. The giants of Genesis may serve as archetypes for these end-time enemies, figures of rebellion that grow larger than life, demanding worship and allegiance. Revelation reminds us that these powers, no matter how intimidating, are destined for defeat when Christ returns in glory. For the faithful, the prophetic dimension of the Nephilim mystery carries both warning and encouragement. The warning is that corruption will rise again, and the battle between light and darkness will reach its climax. The encouragement is that God has already given us the pattern of victory. Noah's faith preserved humanity through the flood, and David's faith brought down the giant. These stories are not just relics of the past, but prophetic signposts, reminding us that victory over the giants, whether ancient or modern, literal or symbolic, comes only through trust in God's power. Ultimately, the prophetic significance of the Nephilim points us back to the central message of Scripture. Humanity cannot defeat corruption on its own. Whether giants of flesh, giants of ideology, or giants of technology, the forces that threaten us are too great without divine intervention. But with God, even the most terrifying giants are brought low. The story of the Nephilim, then, is not just about what was. It is about what is and what is to come. We have walked through Scripture, Apocrypha, archaeology, legend, symbolism, and prophecy, all revolving around a single question. Did giants truly walk the earth? The answer, in the end, may not be a simple yes or no. The Nephilim remain an enigma, suspended between history and myth, between literal beings and spiritual metaphors. Yet their presence in the biblical story is undeniable. and their meaning for us today is just as powerful. For some, the Nephilim are reminders of a lost world, a time when boundaries between the divine and human were blurred, and corruption nearly consumed creation. For others, they are symbols, images of the towering challenges, temptations, and sins that rise up to block our path. Either way, the lesson is the same. When giants stand in front of us, they are not unconquerable. The Bible's consistent message is that God is greater than even the largest enemy. Noah overcame the corruption of his age through obedience. Israel entered the Promised Land not by fearing giants, but by trusting in God's promises. David brought down Goliath not with size or strength, but with faith. And so the mystery of the Nephilim is not only about the past, it is about us. What giants loom over your life? Fear, doubt, addiction, injustice, pride? The Bible tells us that these giants, no matter how intimidating, cannot stand when confronted with the power of faith. The story of the Nephilim ultimately points us back to the God who delivers, the God who rescues, and the God who equips even the smallest and weakest to bring down the mightiest foes. Perhaps that is the true legacy of the giants, not their size, but the reminder that no giant is too big for God.